This is how a millionaire reacts when a child drops a doll, stitched with his initials. Charles Whitmore glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 2:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, he would sign papers to demolish a community center and make another $50 million. He had done this hundreds of times before. Acquire, demolish, profit. Today should have been no different. What Charles didn't know was that inside that building, 7-year-old Maya was finishing something special. A handmade doll stitched with 2 letters, CW, her father's initials. Charles Washington was 7,000 miles away in Afghanistan, and this doll was Maya's way of sending him a hug. As Charles stepped out of his luxury car, he saw only profit margins and development potential. He didn't see Maya sitting on the worn floor, admiring her creation with the pride of someone who had made something beautiful. In exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, a billionaire carrying demolition papers would meet a little girl, excited to show off her precious doll. And in that moment, something extraordinary would happen. Maya's doll would fall to the floor, a child would gasp in worry, and a man who thought he had everything would realize he had nothing at all. This is the story of what happened when those precious stitches scattered across the ground. This is how 2 letters, CW, changed everything. And this is why sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest miracles. For the next 30 minutes, you're going to witness something that proves love really can conquer all. You're going to see what happens when a heart, frozen for decades, suddenly remembers how to feel. This is how a millionaire reacts when a child drops a doll stitched with his initials. And trust me, you won't see this ending coming. The autumn rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charles Whitmore's penthouse office on the 47th floor of the Whitmore Financial Tower in downtown Chicago. At 52, Charles had built an empire from nothing, a portfolio worth $2.3 billion that included real estate, tech investments, and a chain of luxury hotels. His steel gray hair was perfectly styled, his Italian suit impeccable, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the light as he signed another multi-million-dollar contract. Mr. Whitmore, the car is ready for your lunch meeting with the mayor, his assistant Rebecca announced through the intercom. Her voice carried the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to navigate Charles's demanding schedule and even more demanding personality. Charles barely looked up from his mahogany desk, surrounded by monitors displaying stock prices, property values, and profit margins. Cancel it. Move it to tomorrow. I have 3 more contracts to review before the Henderson acquisition meeting at 4. Sir, this is the 3rd time you've rescheduled with Mayor Davidson. His office is... Rebecca. Charles's voice cut through the air like a blade. Do I pay you to question my decisions or to execute them? The intercom fell silent for a moment. I'll handle it, Mr. Whitmore. Charles had built his fortune on precision, control, and an unwavering focus on results. He had no time for pleasantries, small talk, or what he considered the inefficiencies of human emotion. His world was measured in quarterly reports, profit margins, and strategic acquisitions. People were assets or liabilities, nothing more. The rain intensified as Charles reviewed the Henderson acquisition documents. Henderson Manufacturing was a family-owned business struggling with debt, and Charles intended to acquire it, strip its assets, and sell the valuable real estate underneath. It was simple mathematics. Buy low, extract value, maximize profit. The fact that 230 employees would lose their jobs was irrelevant. Business wasn't personal. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife, Margaret. Emily's recital is Thursday. At 7 p.m. She'd love to see you there. Charles deleted the message without responding. Emily was his 8-year-old daughter, but his custody arrangement limited him to every other weekend, a schedule that often conflicted with business obligations. He'd missed the last 3 visits due to international deals. Margaret's lawyer, had been sending increasingly stern letters about his absence, but Charles viewed it as another problem for his legal team to handle. "Mr. Whitmore," Rebecca's voice returned through the intercom. "Your 2 p.m. has arrived early. Send them up." As Charles prepared for his next meeting, he caught his reflection in the window, a successful man who had everything money could buy, yet felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of another profitable day. Outside, Chicago's streets bustled with people hurrying through the rain, their lives as distant to Charles as figures on a balance sheet. The city's sounds were muffled by the thick glass, creating a barrier between Charles and the world below, a world he had systematically removed himself from in pursuit of wealth and power. He had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what any of it was for. 3 days later, Charles's routine was disrupted by an unusual request from his legal team. They needed him to personally inspect a property in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, before finalizing a demolition order. The building, a small community center, sat on land that would become part of his new luxury development project. "Sir, the community has been resistant to the acquisition," his lawyer Davidson explained, as their black Mercedes navigated through streets lined with modest homes and local businesses. "There have been protests, media attention. Your personal inspection and signature are required to move forward." Charles gazed out at the neighborhood with detached interest. Small houses with front porches, corner barbershops, a family-owned grocery store with hand-painted signs. It was a world he had left behind decades ago. "How long will this take?" 15 minutes maximum. Just a walkthrough and your signature on the final documents. The Riverside Community Center was a modest 2-story brick building that had clearly seen better days. Peeling paint, cracked windows, and a small playground with aging equipment spoke to years of limited funding and gradual decline. A few protesters held signs reading, "Save our community" and "Families over profit," but they seemed more weary than angry. As Charles stepped out of the Mercedes, adjusting his $3,000 overcoat against the crisp October air, he noticed the sounds of children playing inside the building. A woman in her 30s with kind eyes and worn clothing approached him. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Sarah Chen, the center's director." "Thank you for coming." Charles nodded curtly. "I'm here for the inspection. Let's make this quick." Sarah's face fell slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Of course. Would you like to see what we do here first? We serve about 150 families in the neighborhood. After-school programs, job training, elderly services. That won't be necessary. I just need to verify the structural conditions for demolition." As they walked toward the entrance, Charles heard laughter and voices echoing from inside. Through the front windows, he could see children engaged in various activities, some doing homework at tables, others playing games, a group listening to a story in the corner. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah continued as they entered, "I know this is just business to you, but this place, it's everything to these families. Some of these kids don't have anywhere else to go after school. Mrs. Rodriguez brings her elderly mother here every day for social interaction. The job training program has helped dozens of people find employment." Charles' expression remained unchanged. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Chen, but the reality is that this property is no longer financially viable as a community center. My development will bring jobs, increase property values, and generate significant tax revenue for the city." They walked through the main hall, passing bulletin boards covered with children's artwork, photos of community events, and thank you notes from families. Charles barely glanced at them, focused instead on noting the building's structural elements, outdated electrical systems, and needed repairs, all justification for demolition. It was then that he heard a small voice call out, "Sarah! Sarah! Look what I finished!" A little girl, no more than 7 years old, came running across the hall, She had bright brown eyes, pigtails tied with mismatched ribbons, and wore a faded purple dress that was clearly a hand-me-down. In her small hands, she clutched something protectively against her chest. "Maya, remember what we talked about running inside?" Sarah said gently, but her voice carried affection rather than reproach. Maya stopped abruptly when she noticed Charles, her eyes growing wide at his imposing presence and expensive clothing. She stepped closer to Sarah, suddenly shy. "It's okay, sweetie. This is Mr. Whitmore. Maya, show him what you've been working on." With hesitant pride, Maya held up a small cloth doll. It was clearly handmade, slightly lopsided, with yarn for hair and a simple dress stitched from fabric scraps. But what caught Charles's attention immediately was the careful embroidery on the doll's tiny shirt. The letters CW stitched in, blue thread. Charles stared at the doll, his mind racing. "Where did you get that?" Maya looked confused by his sharp tone. I made it. Mrs. Patterson taught me how to sew. The letters are for my daddy. Maya's father is overseas with the military," Sarah explained quietly. "She hasn't seen him in 8 months. She's been working on this doll for weeks. His name is Charles too," Maya added, her voice small but proud. "Charles Washington. The doll is so I can hug him when I miss Daddy." The simple innocence of her explanation hit Charles like a physical blow. Here was a child, in a building he was about to destroy, holding a doll that bore his initials, made with love for a father she missed desperately. May I see it?" Charles asked, his voice softer than it had been all day. Maya looked to Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. With careful hands, Maya extended the doll toward Charles. As Charles reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly, Maya's small hand slipped. The doll fell, hitting the worn linoleum floor with a soft thud. "Oh no!" Maya gasped immediately, dropping to her knees to retrieve her precious creation. In that moment, watching this little girl frantically gather up the doll she had made with such love and care, something shifted deep inside Charles Whitmore. The careful walls he had built around his heart began to crack. Maya clutched the doll to her chest, tears welling in her eyes as she examined it for damage. A few stitches had come loose where the arm met the body, and some of the yarn hair had become disheveled. To Charles, it looked like a simple repair, but to Maya, it might as well have been a catastrophe. "It's broken," she whispered, her voice thick with disappointment. "I worked so hard to make it perfect for Daddy." Charles knelt down slowly, his expensive suit creasing as he lowered himself to Maya's eye level. "May I take a look?" Maya hesitated, then handed him the doll with trembling fingers. Charles examined it carefully, his mind flashing back to memories he had buried for decades, his own childhood in a neighborhood much like this one, his mother teaching him to sew buttons back onto his shirts because they couldn't afford to, buy new clothes, the pride he felt when he completed his first small repair. "It's not broken," Charles said gently. "Just a few loose stitches. See, the important parts are all still here." He pointed to the carefully embroidered initials. "These letters you made, they're perfect. Your father is going to treasure this." Maya's eyes brightened slightly. "Really, you think so?" "I know so. When someone makes something with this much love, it shows. Your daddy will feel that love every time he looks at it." Sarah watched this exchange with amazement. The cold, calculating businessman who had walked into their center was speaking to Maya with a gentleness that seemed to surprise even him. "Maya," Charles continued, "do you have a needle and thread here? I think I might be able to help fix this." Maya's face lit up. "Mrs. Patterson has a sewing kit. I'll get it." As Maya scampered away, Charles remained kneeling on the floor, still holding the small doll. Sarah approached cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore, I have to say, I didn't expect—" "Neither did I," Charles admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked around the community center with new eyes, really seeing it for the first time. The worn furniture wasn't just old, it was well used by people who cared for it. The children's artwork wasn't clutter, it was evidence of dreams and creativity. The elderly people sitting in the corner weren't taking up space. They were finding dignity and companionship. Maya returned with a small sewing kit, followed by Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman with silver hair and knowing eyes who clearly served as the center's unofficial grandmother. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Patterson said, taking in the sight of Charles Whitmore sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Maya, you've found yourself a helper." Charles accepted the needle and thread, his hands remembering skills he hadn't used in 30 years. As he worked to repair the doll's arm, Maya sat beside him, chattering about her father. "Daddy's in Afghanistan. He fixes helicopters for the army. Mama says he's helping keep other soldiers safe so they can come home to their families too. He sends me letters, but sometimes they take a really long time to get here." With each stitch, Charles felt something loosening inside his chest. "When did you last hear from him?" 2 weeks ago. He said he's proud of me for learning to sew and that he can't wait to see what I make. That's why this doll has to be perfect. It's going in my next letter to him." Charles's hands stilled for a moment. 2 weeks without word from a parent. He thought of his own daughter, Emily, whom he hadn't called in over a month despite living in the same city. "There," Charles said, holding up the repaired doll. "Good as new." Maya examined his work with the seriousness of a quality inspector, then broke into a brilliant smile. "It's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." Before Charles could react, Maya threw her small arms around his neck in an enthusiastic hug. The spontaneous affection hit him like a thunderbolt. When was the last time someone had hugged him without wanting something in return? "Maya," Mrs. Patterson called gently, "why don't you show Mr. Whitmore some of the other things you've been working on?" As Maya led Charles to a table covered with her sewing projects, pot holders, small pillows, and fabric bookmarks, Charles found himself genuinely interested in her progress and proud of her determination. She explained each piece with enthusiasm, sharing the stories behind every crooked stitch and imperfect seam. "This one's for Mama," Maya said, holding up a small pillow. "She works 2 jobs and she's always tired. I thought this might help her feel better when she rests." The simple generosity of the gesture, a child who had so little creating something to comfort someone else, struck Charles profoundly. He began to see the community center not as a failing building on valuable land, but as a place where people like Maya learned kindness, resilience, and hope. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said quietly, approaching with a clipboard. "I hate to interrupt, but your lawyer said he needs those signatures." Charles looked at the documents. Authorization for demolition, vinyl acquisition papers, permits for his luxury development. His signature would set in motion the destruction of this place that had become so much more meaningful in the past hour. He thought of Maya's father serving overseas while his daughter learned to sew in this humble building. He thought of Mrs. Patterson, who had clearly devoted her retirement years to teaching children like Maya skills that gave them pride and purpose. He thought of Sarah, who could have worked anywhere but chose to serve this community. And he thought of his own daughter, Emily, growing up in his absence while he pursued another dollar, another acquisition, another meaningless victory in a game that suddenly felt hollow. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah prompted gently. "The signatures." Charles looked down at the papers, then at Maya, who was showing the repaired doll to another child with obvious joy. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. For the first time in decades, Charles Whitmore was genuinely uncertain about what came next. Charles stood in the center of the community room, surrounded by the evidence of lives being lived, dreams being nurtured, and love being shared. The documents in his hands felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Around him, children continued their activities, unaware that their safe haven hung in the balance of his decision. "Mr. Whitmore," His lawyer Davidson appeared at his elbow. "Sir, we need those signatures to meet the city deadline. The demolition crew is scheduled for Monday morning." Charles looked at the papers, then at Maya, who was now helping another child with a sewing project, patiently showing her how to thread a needle, just as Mrs. Patterson had shown her. The sight triggered a memory so powerful it nearly took his breath away. He was 8 years old, sitting at his grandmother's kitchen table in a small house in Milwaukee. His mother worked double shifts at the diner, and his grandmother taught him to darn socks and mend tears in his school clothes. "Charles," she had said, "the measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he gives back to the world." He had forgotten those words for decades, buried them under years of ruthless ambition and relentless pursuit of wealth. But now, watching Maya's careful attention to helping her friend, he remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond profit margins and quarterly returns. "Sir," Davidson pressed. "Give me a moment," Charles said, his voice tight. Sarah approached hesitantly. "Mr. Whitmore, I know you have a decision to make, but before you do, there's something I think you should know about Maya." Charles looked up from the documents. Her father's deployment was extended. He won't be home for Christmas as planned. Maya doesn't know yet. Her mother is trying to find the right way to tell her. That doll she made, it was going to be her Christmas gift to him, something to remind him that he's loved while he's so far away. The words hit Charles like a physical blow. This little girl, who had so little, was spending her time and effort creating something beautiful for someone else. Meanwhile, Charles had spent the morning calculating how to maximize profit from destroying her sanctuary. "And the other children here," Sarah continued quietly. "Marcus over there, his grandmother brings him every day because both his parents work 3 jobs just to keep their apartment. The center is the only place he gets help with homework. Jenny is learning to read here because her school doesn't have enough resources. Mrs. Patterson volunteers 20 hours a week because she says these kids remind her that there's still good in the world." Charles watched Mrs. Patterson patiently, helping a young boy with his math homework, her wrinkled hands gentle and encouraging. He saw teenagers working on job applications with Sarah's guidance. He noticed elderly people playing cards in the corner, finding community and purpose in their golden years. This wasn't just a building. It was a lifeline. "Maya," Charles called softly. The little girl looked up from her sewing and came over, her brown eyes bright with curiosity. "Can you tell me more about your daddy? What's he like?" Maya's face glowed with pride. "He's the best daddy in the whole world. He's brave and strong, but he's also really gentle. When I was little and had bad dreams, he would sing to me until I fell asleep. He taught me that being kind is more important than being right, and that helping other people is the best way to be happy." Charles felt tears threatening for the first time in years. He sounds like a very wise man. He is. And when he comes home, I'm going to bring him here to meet everyone. He always says that the best people are the ones who help others, especially when nobody's watching. I think he'd really like Sarah and Mrs. Patterson. The innocence and love. In Maya's voice shattered something deep inside Charles. Here was a child who understood something he had forgotten, that true worth came from connection, from service, from love. Charles looked down at the demolition papers in his hands, then, slowly, deliberately tore them in half. "Mr. Whitmore," Davidson exclaimed. "Sir, what are you doing?" "I'm making a different choice," Charles said firmly. He turned to Sarah. "Ms. Chen, what would it take to renovate this building properly? New electrical, updated plumbing, fresh paint, modern equipment?" Sarah stared at him in shock. I don't understand. The Whitmore Foundation, which I'm establishing today, wants to make a significant investment in this community center. I'm thinking new computers for job training, a proper playground for the children, a commercial kitchen for meal programs, and whatever else you need to serve these families. The room fell silent. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her tutoring. Children stopped their activities, and even Davidson stood with his mouth slightly open. "But sir," Davidson finally managed, "the luxury development, the profit projections." "We'll have to find another location," Charles said firmly. "This land is going to remain exactly what it is, a place where people like Maya learn that love is something you make with your own hands." Maya looked up at Charles with wonder. "Does this mean we don't have to leave?" "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. In fact, I'm hoping you'll teach me more about sewing. I think I might want to make something for my own daughter." Maya's face broke into the most radiant smile Charles had ever seen. "Really? I'd love to teach you. What do you want to make for her?" Charles knelt down to Maya's level once more, this time feeling lighter than he had in years. "I think I'd like to make her a doll, one that shows her how much her daddy loves her, even when he's been too busy to show it properly." As Charles looked around the community center, really seeing it now as a place of hope rather than an obstacle to profit, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the deep satisfaction of doing something simply because it was right. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret about Emily's upcoming recital. This time, instead of deleting it, Charles responded immediately, "I'll be there, front row. And afterward, there's someone very special I'd like Emily to meet." Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for fixing my daddy's doll, and thank you for saving our home." Charles smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Thank you, Maya. You've given me something much more valuable than anything I could give you." "What's that?" "You reminded me what it feels like to be human." As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, streaming through the community center's windows, Charles Whitmore began the most important acquisition of his life, the reclamation of his own heart. And it all started with a little girl, a handmade doll, and the simple act of choosing love over profit. Outside, the protesters who had been holding signs reading "Save Our Community" began to realize something remarkable was happening. Inside, Charles sat cross-legged on the floor, learning to sew alongside Maya, finally understanding that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we make and the love we share. The millionaire had found something far more valuable than money. He had found his way back to what truly mattered. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Your presence here is not just appreciated, it's powerful. If this message touched you in any way, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to be part of every next chapter. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Until the next story unfolds, stay awake, stay aware,